To fully understand the story of Tarkov, we need to look at all available sources. Of course, we have the game itself, but BSG has provided us with many other sources to piece together what has taken place and what may happen in the future. Some of these sources include obscure documents published years ago, and some of them buried in forum posts. Then of course we have the Raid live action series, but now we turn our attention to the official Escape from Tarkov books, written by Alexander Kontorovich, starting with Predator, the first in the trilogy. We'll do a deeper dive into the individual aspects of these books later, but for now, here's a full review of the first book. Keep in mind that this video will contain spoilers. Predator follows our protagonist, Denis, who is an IT systems administrator for the Terragroup Corporation. He currently lives in Tarkov City in a relatively high-end studio apartment that is equipped with a self-designed smart home system. One day, Terragroup executives order a sort of all-hands-on-deck emergency review of all systems relating to their inventory. The job must be completed as quickly as possible, so to remove distractions as well as provide employees with a comfortable working environment, Terragroup rents out an entire wing of the nearby Azure Coast Health Resort for the employees to stay at while they complete their task. Oddly enough, some of Terragroup's armed USEC security personnel shuttled the teams there, and while Denis finds this somewhat odd, he doesn't think too much of it. For about 2 weeks, the teams work day and night to complete their task, but they do so successfully and on time. Shuttled back to the city, Denis and a few of his coworkers decide not to disembark in their USEC-guarded vans on time, and instead visit a nearby bar or cafe. It is at this point that Denis starts to notice a few odd things. Vehicles seem to be leaving the city in a hurry, and the streets seem slightly disorderly. Hiding out in his apartment, he watches news reports of violence breaking out all over the city and that a full evacuation is going on. Rather than evacuate, he decides to hold out in his apartment and wait for everything to blow over. Eventually, he decides to head out for supplies some days later and finds that various shops are either broken into and looted or are closed shut. Eventually, he hears some looting nearby and goes to see what's going on. Some military men have shot and killed a looter, but they spare Denis because he is unarmed. He later recalls that they were wearing a patch that reads, "Bear." Back at his apartment, he isn't sure what to do next until some of his friends arrive. They have a car ready, and they are urging him to leave with them and evacuate. They are also Terragroup employees. They are about to leave when Denis remembers he forgot his water bottles in the apartment, and he heads back up to get them. This ends up saving his life, as a squad of bears show up and run his 2 waiting friends against a database of Terragroup targets. They match, and the bears shoot and kill them while they're still in the car. Then, they light their car on fire. Denis is also on the list, including his apartment number, and the bear squad search his apartment while Denis hides nearby. Not finding their target, they decide to rig the apartment with a grenade or a claymore booby trap so that it will kill Denis when he returns. Avoiding the bear squad, and unable to return to his apartment, Denis starts roaming the streets, trying to figure out what to do next. Before long, he is captured by a group of thugs that are essentially proto-scavs, or people who will eventually become scavs as conditions deteriorate further. They are not very well armed, mostly with bats and knives, and they force Denis to become part of their looting squad. Each day, they force these captured people to help them break into apartments and methodically loot them of any weapons, medicine, food, water, and liquor that they can find. After days of performing this backbreaking labor, Denis finds an opportunity to escape, and in doing so, inadvertently kills a man in the process, his first kill of many. Now free, but a wanted man by both this gang and apparently Bear, he wanders the streets again and notices that a shop nearby seems to be still in operation despite all the mayhem, although it now has armed guards and has been fortified with sandbags. Denis thinks that it makes sense that even some shopkeepers are adapting to this new way of life, and that he may be able to find things he needs there. After forming a shaky new relationship with the shopkeeper, he learns that he can trade high-demand items for things like food and weapons. One of the most in-demand items right now is fresh water. Finding a leaky pipe in a nearby apartment that he broke into, he slowly fills empty water bottles with fresh water and uses a lighter to reseal the anti-tamper seal on the bottles to make them appear brand new, and brings these in, along with some cigarettes and condoms to trade for food. The shopkeeper laughs at him when he tries to trade condoms, but he gladly takes the other items. Upon leaving the shop, he gets roughed up by some criminals, and he learns that these guys are harassing and stealing from anyone who visits the shopkeeper. Finding protection, specifically a gun, becomes a priority. Realizing that the bear who killed the looter earlier shot him because he probably had a gun, he revisits the crime scene and finds a rusty, sawed-off pump shotgun under a display case. Bringing more water to the dealer, he trades for some shotgun shells, and he's now armed and dangerous. This next sequence was a little hard to follow, but it seems like the bandits that roughed him up after leaving the trader wanted to deposit a portion of whatever he got from the trader in a bin located nearby. Denis decides to ambush and deal with these bandits, or they will never stop stealing from him. He ends up shooting and killing one, and injuring a second. Upon hearing the shots, Pavel, who also goes by the name Sledgehammer, comes by and offers a deal to Denis. If he can stop criminals like this from harassing the trader's customers, they can form a better relationship with discounts. But if he causes too much destruction and mayhem, they'll kill him. Eventually, the trader tells Denis of another dealer operating near the port area. He was a criminal and lowlife long before Tarkov fell into violence, and he was also a drug dealer. While he's never specifically named, this sounds exactly like Skier. He is a competitor to the trader, and he wants him to go meet the guy to find out exactly what's going on. Before setting out on this journey, Denis decides to meet with an old friend by the name of Mishka, who was a drug addict, to see if he knows anything else about this new trader. After arriving at Mishka's place, he finds that he is sober and acting oddly. Then some hooded individuals silently enter the room and put a bag over Denis's head and take him off to some unknown location. Removing the bag from his head, Denis is now in some kind of underground tunnel, and the hooded individuals, who refer to each other as brothers, interrogate Denis. They are highly interested in the fact that he worked for Terragroup, but upon learning that he was just a systems admin, they become disinterested and say to one another that he is not one of us. They place him in a holding cell until they plan to force him to start digging tunnels where he meets another captive, a former police officer. The police officer tells him in detail the chronological order of events of how everything happened in Tarkov. Both law enforcement and local government knew well in advance that something was coming that would require a full-scale evacuation. How or why they knew this, he didn't know. The evacuation was going smoothly until buses of evacuees started being shot at by unknown forces, and then complete anarchy and shootouts sprung up all over the city. It culminated in a blinding flash and a huge blast at the center of the city, after which all sophisticated electronics ceased working. He remarked that even the military had concrete barriers to seal off the entire region on standby, like it was all rehearsed well in advance. These hooded figures who had captured them both are clearly cultists, or will become cultists, although the book doesn't specifically say that name. Denis also reflects on seeing their markings around the city, and that they look oddly familiar. Eventually, Denis hatches a plan to escape during a guard shift change, and ends up killing a cultist leader in the process. He also steals his unique-looking knife. Later on, when Denis and the former cop share a meal, Denis goes to slice up some sausage with the knife, and the cop gets very serious, advising that the knife shouldn't be used for that purpose, and that it's dangerous, and has been used to draw human blood. After leaving, the book transitions to the cultist point of view after Denis had escaped, and they remark to one another that they need to increase security, because no one must know when the blue flame returns. What this blue flame is unknown. Before leaving the area, Denis returns to Mishka's apartment, and while going through a jacket pocket, he finds a flash drive. Recognizing that this is something that Terragroup personnel used, he remarks that it not only contains information, but it can also be used as a key. He keeps the device. Over the course of the book, Denis has some skirmishes with various scav gangs and scattered pockets of USEC. During this time, he covertly sneaks into some scav bases and either converses with or kills leaders of various gangs from the shadows, never revealing his face. When doing this, he refers to himself as being the Predator, a name he randomly came up with that is inspired from the American movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. This Predator figure becomes legendary and feared among the scav gangs, and nobody ever suspects that Denis is the actual Predator, but he is the Predator's messenger. Eventually, he meets the port drug dealer, or basically Skier. He has an elaborate operation going on and has a large network of criminals working for him. Skier is highly interested in the flash drives like the one Denis found earlier. This confirms to Denis that the flash drives are very important. After Denis leaves, Skier remarks to his henchman that Denis is the real deal because he carries the knife of a sect leader openly. Eventually, Denis decides to read what's on one of the flash drives by using a laptop he found. In it, he discovers that it has all kinds of Terragroup logs and information that was input by various people. In it, he discovers that Terragroup also knew that some kind of event was coming, but rather than stop it, they seemed eager for it to happen. But something causes Denis to freeze when he notices that under several entries, they abruptly end with a single sentence. They are already here. Who they are is unknown. There are a few more adventures and battles that take place. The most notable is towards the end of the book. Denis infiltrates a local factory, which happens to be occupied by a huge squad of USEC. Killing a few and taking their gear, he retreats back to a friendly scav checkpoint and arms them all with stolen equipment. Encouraged by all the fancy new gear, Denis and the huge group of scavs assault the factory and take it over. While searching the pockets of a dead USEC officer, Denis finds another flash drive. The scavs take over the factory and turn it into a fortress, complete with booby traps and other fortifications. Eventually, an SUV pulls up, and Denis decides to parley with the USEC commander. The USEC commander requests that the scavs give the factory back to them, but they refuse. They then turn their attention to the flash drive that the USEC officer had, stating that it was extremely important to them. Again, Denis refuses. The USEC angrily leave, and the book abruptly ends. That is the basic story of the first book, but there are a few things to note. First, I want to talk about the book itself. Obviously, it was written in Russian, and translating Russian to English can be a little bit difficult. At times, the book can read like a young adult's novel, and whoever translated it was definitely very, very British. And a few jokes and bits of British humor seem to be added in here and there, and can seem a little out of place. I don't think this is the fault of the author or his writing style, but rather the translator. Second, there are definitely a lot of questions raised here. The cult definitely seems to be way more important to the story of Tarkov than I originally thought. Also, Denis said that the cult symbols seem familiar. Why would they be familiar to a middle management Terragroup desk jockey? I have theories, but that'll be another video. Also, a few things to note. The UN is never mentioned or seen at any point. Maybe that will be in the next 2 books. Also, the only dealer that is mentioned by name is Therapist, but only briefly. The original dealer that Denis meets tells him he should go see her sometime. But I'm definitely thinking the drug dealer is Skier. No bosses are ever mentioned either. It's definitely an interesting story, and I'm hoping in the next 2 books it's elaborated upon further. I also hope that we get to meet some of the bosses and other traitors and find out more about them. The entire time Denis's character evolves from a computer nerd to a hardened killer, he seems indifferent about the change. He never battles with the emotional impact of killing others and seeing a large amount of death. This could be a coping mechanism, but it seems like a missed opportunity for some good character development. The mysteries of Tarkov are beginning to unravel. Denis, who was once a lowly systems administrator for the Terragroup Corporation, now hardly recognizes his former self, exchanging his casual business suits for plate carriers. And instead of carrying a smartphone, he now totes a fully automatic submachine gun, stolen from the corpse of a dead man. Welcome to the full review of The Voice Behind, Book 2 in the official Escape From Tarkov Trilogy, written by Alexander Kantorovich. In this book, we learn more about Denis, the Terragroup Corporation, and Tarkov itself, and we meet some familiar faces along the way, as well as some new ones. Keep in mind that this review contains full spoilers for the book. Also, if you haven't watched my Book 1 review, please go back and watch it now. A link is in the description. Book 2 contains a ton of information that I found interesting, so this review will be split into 2 parts. Also, please keep in mind that some content is graphic in nature and may be distressing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The Voice Behind starts with Denis, who is now building a hideout that is somewhat similar to the ones we use in-game. He has rigged up a solar power array to some rechargeable batteries so that he can use a laptop. Now very much aware of the dangers that surround him in Tarkov City, he has fortified the perimeter and entrances of his hideout with all sorts of booby traps. He visits with the original shopkeeper, named Ogrizko, who tells Denis that he has a customer wanting a job done. This customer is an arms dealer, and the therapist has apparently stolen or somehow cheated him out of some very rare and expensive medical items or drugs. If Denis, or the Predator, can recover it or find out more about the situation, both he and the dealer will be awarded a considerable amount of grenades and ammunition. Denis agrees on behalf of the Predator. He is also warned that the therapist is sly and cunning. Denis travels to wherever Therapist's main base of operations is. It is a relatively fortified building with derelict cars used as barriers for the main entrance. Denis decides to watch and observe the building for some time by hiding inside of an electrical transformer building nearby. He learns in detail how Therapist conducts her business. She keeps a relatively low inventory of food or medicine at her location, then dispatches various groups of henchmen to different warehouses or cache locations to restock. If her place were to be raided or a single cache or warehouse lost, they wouldn't lose everything. Denis thinks to himself that this is smart. After monitoring the habits of Therapist's runners, he monitors one that is obviously visiting one of these nearby caches that might hold what he was paid to find. But after watching the runner disable some kind of complex minefield or grenade booby trap system, he decides that it's best to simply return back to his primary hideout and either hire some scavs to figure out how to get inside the place or just report his findings. While trying to leave the area, a group of scavs is carrying some improvised stretchers that are loaded with something heavy. Denis hides nearby, and just as they are about to pass, one trips and bottles of vodka fall out from underneath the tarp covering the stretchers and smash all over the ground. The guard instructs the men to discard the broken bottles in the trash heap that Denis is hiding in, and once discovered, Denis preemptively shoots and kills the guard of the group. He recognizes one of the scavs as Andre, a member of the original work crew that Denis was forced into at the onset of the Tarkov crisis. Denis promises them food if they simply leave in peace, and they seem happy with the arrangement. But as Denis is distributing the food and somewhat distracted, someone knocks him out. Denis awakens to find himself back at the headquarters of the original work crew he was forced into, led by a man named Makar. Makar's operation has evolved significantly since the onset of the violence in Tarkov. Instead of it being a ragtag band of criminals with knives and bats, they are now a fully equipped criminal gang that number over 100, with assault rifles and a massive cache of supplies. Truly a force to be reckoned with. They beat Denis for some time. Then Makar promises to release Denis alive if he agrees to tell them the location of his stash, so that they can take all of his belongings. Denis doesn't reveal his actual main hideout, but rather the transformer station he camped out in for several days to observe Therapist. Makar sends his men to gather what was in Denis's alternate hideout, and although he isn't very impressed with the sawed-off shotgun, a pistol, and a few cans of food, he tells him that he is a man of his word and will release Denis. But before he does, Denis needs to pay for killing one of his men when he escaped in the first book, and to pay for this, he has to become their dog. As Denis comes to find out, this punishment is a unique form of torture where Denis is chained to an overhead metal cable and can only travel a very small distance. He must always walk on all fours, and he cannot speak. If anyone comes near Makar's camp, he is to bark like a dog. Any of Makar's men can come over and kick him whenever they feel like, and he's only fed scraps and canned dog food whenever someone actually remembers to feed him. Makar keeps several women around, dressed very provocatively. Denis assumes that they are either forced or willing prostitutes. One night they pass by Denis, still enduring his dog punishment, and mock him. Denis hasn't had water in 2 days now, and he recognizes one woman and pleads for her to give him something to drink. Denis reminds her that they once dated, and she either refuses to admit that she recognizes him or actually doesn't recognize him. She jokes that she needs to relieve herself, and maybe that will give him something to drink. After many more days, or possibly weeks, enduring this strange punishment, Denis at least gets moved to another corner of Makar's camp that includes a small doghouse, and uses a nail he finds on the ground to release his chains. He escapes in the middle of the night and makes his way back to his hideout, where he cleans up and feasts on whatever rations he has. Denis returns to Ogryzko, the original trader from the first book, and reports his findings. He is awarded all kinds of supplies and fresh gear. As he is about to leave, one of the trader's guards, who goes by Sledgehammer, takes Denis aside and offers him a unique gun as a reward. The gun is an SVU-AS, or basically a suppressed bullpup SVD. It has a special scope that can calculate bullet drop with a laser rangefinder, and he remarks that it needs special ammunition that can be sourced from none other than Prapper. And then, as they converse, it dawns on Denis that Prapper is the one who took out the contract against Therapist. As they discuss the rifle further, Sledgehammer remarks that the suppressor and trigger were highly customized, and that kind of work could only be done by the mechanic. Denis returns to the part of the city where Makar was operating and observes the sets of apartment buildings he is planning to strip of their valuables with his loot slaves. or now called Ripper teams. During the night, he sets up several grenade booby traps, and twice is successful in killing and wounding several members of these teams. Then, Makar's source of water unexpectedly runs out when reliably flowing water faucets cease working. Finding a new source some distance away, he instructs his Ripper teams to fill massive containers to bring back to their base. But upon the return trip, Denis starts to harass them with his new sniper rifle from long range, and ends up killing and wounding many more. After some time, Makar sends out one of his men with a white flag to attempt to parley with whomever is shooting at them. Denis hides nearby, and when the man with the flag gets near, he orders him to stop. Denis tells the man that the Predator has put a hit out on Makar and anyone with him for humiliating him with the dog punishment, and instructs him to go back to his base with the old dog collar they forced him to wear, instructing them to abandon their base, but to leave Makar chained up with the dog collar, just as Denis was. With hardly any water left, Makar opens up his stores to his roughly 100-something rabble of scavs, bandits, slaves, and women. They enjoy increased rations and begin drinking beer and various types of hard liquor well into the night. The drunkenness gives some of his men confidence, and the next morning, 15 of them charge out of the camp, determined to find this hidden sniper. Denis retreats and returns back home and visits a friendly scav gang under the command of the gang leader that goes by Gavrish, where he hires several trained marksmen to rain hell on Makar's camp. For some reason, possibly from drinking so much, the entirety of Makar's base has been plagued with a case of diarrhea, and as they line up to use some crude holes in the ground as toilets, sniper fire from multiple directions and long range begins to tear the camp up. Not even the women or slaves were spared, and in the end, only a few dozen remained alive. As it turns out, on the night that everyone spent drinking, Denis had found laxatives in a nearby abandoned shop and poured a bunch of it into the large water tank Makar's men were trying to wheel back to their base. After they rushed out and scared Denis off, they retrieved their water. Over the next several days, Denis keeps constantly harassing Makar's base, sometimes attacking by day and sometimes at night while using night vision and getting in close. He uses a mixture of tactics, from sniping from long range to nighttime infiltrations with suppressed weapons to laying booby traps. Eventually, Makar is down to only 12 men plus himself, and they agree to kill all of their mostly wounded slaves by locking them inside of the slave barracks and throwing grenades inside. Finally, a bandit from Makar's gang comes out with a white flag to once again plead for mercy. Denis meets him, instructing him to approach while walking backwards so they never see his face. Makar's man agrees to shackle Makar to the same dog run that Denis was once chained to the next day, and Denis agrees to let the survivors flee safely. That night, Denis radios the two talented marksmen from Gavrish's scav gang to help him engage targets the next day. Denis realizes that Makar's gang has one last trick. They will loosely tie him to the dog run with a weapon nearby, and a few men will also stay behind so that when Denis comes to mock Makar before killing him, they will spring the trap. Denis covertly takes out two of Makar's men with a silenced AKS-74U, then takes his time on Makar, shooting him in the legs, the hips, and all over, forcing him to endure maximum pain before finally dying. Meanwhile, the rest of Makar's group is on their way out of the base when the scavs Denis hired previously lay waste to the entire group, including the women, with sniper fire, machine gun fire, and grenades. In the end, Makar's entire gang is completely wiped out. Under the guise of the Predator's messenger, Denis relays to Gavrish's gang that Makar's old base now belongs to him. He may also have the massive amount of loot that they've stored in a makeshift warehouse inside the base, with one exception. Denis can come by from time to time and take a few things, and whenever the Predator needs fighters from Gavrish's scav gang, they must oblige. Gavrish agrees. Denis also finds a hidden safe in Makar's old quarters, but has no way of opening it. In the meantime, Denis rests for several days, and also splits up loot from his hideout and disperses it among various hidden stashes all over the place, so as not to have all of his eggs in one basket. Denis finds a safecracker and revisits Makar's safe. The safecracker mentions that Terragroup purchased a large number of these types of safes, and that they can withstand oxyacetylene torches and various other brute force tactics, but they can be cracked. It takes about an hour, but the guy cracks the safe, and inside Denis finds all kinds of interesting things. A box with various gold trinkets, stacks of US dollars and euros, 5 flash drives, some fresh blanks, and a folder with all kinds of intelligence with drawings and schematics. Later on, he reads this from the documents. In order to minimize the potential negative consequences of an emergency evacuation, it is proposed that a number of special storage facilities be established and equipped within a period of 3 months. Provide autonomous power for each special facility, for which work and equipment will be coordinated with Department 3K. In order to prevent unauthorized access, several layers of protection must be put in place. In connection to this, inlet locks require retrofitting with autonomous control and identification systems. Department 4C must calculate the equipment requirements for a period of instability up to 3 years. Division B has to select and instruct a number of staff members of USEC operators and authorized representatives of the technical office, in accordance with the attached list. As Denis scours through this intelligence and some flash drives, he finds various Terragroup and USEC personnel had specific instructions to unlock various areas or activate something, but the key holders never knew what it actually was. After some time, he learns that the flash drives not only allow you to use a keycard reader, but then a keycard is needed for the actual door for a Terragroup storage facility. Everything about these flash drives and keycards is heavily encrypted and has multiple layers of secrecy. For example, in order to visit one of these Terragroup storage facilities, the flash key might be issued by one branch of Terragroup or USEC, but the keycard would be issued by another, a form of two-factor authentication. After all of his research, he finds that he has a flash key for storage facility number 9C, and he tells himself that he needs to find a keycard in the location of this Terragroup facility. Denis then finally meets Prapor face to face, an arrangement that the original dealer from the first book set up. They get to know each other a little bit, and Prapor demands to meet with the Predator face to face, but Denis assures him that this is not possible. Later on, Denis remarks that the city is really beginning to deteriorate. Trash is piling up, and there are more and more gunfights. Everything is just a mess. While traveling, he witnesses a shootout between some USEC and a few scavs. He saves one of the scavs, but the scav was already mortally wounded. He tells Denis that there's an extremely valuable item that they were hauling before getting into the gunfight, and Denis finds it, along with looting the bodies of several very geared dead USEC. It's a large case that contains all kinds of hard drives from various areas around Tarkov, such as the port facilities, polychem factories, and so on. He has no idea what it's for, but he starts to haul it away. Night falls, and Denis witnesses a large squad of USEC enter a nearby apartment building. A massive firefight ensues, and for some reason, Denis decides to aid the USEC. Turns out they got into a fight with a huge group of cultists, and after a very lengthy firefight, he ends up befriending the USEC in charge. The firefight rages, and the USEC radio for aid that won't arrive until morning. The building they are in is severely damaged during the firefight, until finally, a cultist requests that they talk without weapons, as both sides have suffered significant losses. The cultist reveals that he is a priest, and that although they do not have a church, they are witnesses to the coming, an event that will bring forth the true masters of the world. The cultist priest then explains that those who have witnessed the blue flame are blessed, and Denis realizes that this was the EMP that rendered most electronics useless within Tarkov. The priest attempts to convert Denis and the USECs into joining them and becoming soldiers for them. To show how strong their devotion is, the priest summons one of his soldiers to his side, produces his cultist knife, and fatally stabs the cultist soldier, who does not show a single sign of pain or discomfort as he dies. Denis buys a little time by saying that he needs to spread the gospel to the injured with them, and the priest informs them if they haven't reached a decision within 20 minutes and come out of the building, they will level it with an RPG. They wait and hope for the USEC backup to arrive, but after 20 minutes, the cultists open fire on the building with RPGs. Unafraid to die, the cultist shooting the RPG is simply standing out in the open on the street, and Denis is able to shoot and wound the cultist, who drops his RPG and runs away. Then a huge squad of USEC arrive and secure the area and relieve Denis and his trapped USEC friends. Taken back to a small USEC outpost, Denis is met by the commander of the small detachment, who attempts to interrogate him on his past. Knowing that revealing that he was once part of Terragroup is a bad idea, he lies and tells them he worked for the Predator long before things went to hell in Tarkov. They buy it, and when Denis asks if they have any cultists as prisoners, they do, but they are unresponsive. Denis asks if he can speak with them, and upon entering the holding cell, Denis pretends that he is a cultist priest and displays one of his knives. The captured cultist believes him and then tells them everything about their operation and beliefs. Unfortunately, the book doesn't tell us those details, but only that it shocks and scares Denis and the USEC man. The book switches to the point of view of the USEC commander, who is then visited by a mysterious USEC counterintelligence officer. The USEC commander thinks to himself that every time he sees this guy, he's too confident, almost like he knows way more about what's going on than he reveals. The counterintelligence officer, by the name Mark Forbett, is debriefed by the USEC commander on what had taken place with the battle against the cultists, and the unlikely meeting and alliance with Denis. The counterintelligence officer perks up at the mention of the cultists, and seems almost giddy about hearing how well they perform in combat, remarking once that they seem like a real highly trained assault team. Later on, Forbett instructs the USEC commander to find out more about Denis and other groups in the area, and that he already has extensive intelligence on various dealers and groups in the area, including Prapper and the Hood, which may possibly be Fence. Over the next several chapters, Denis learns that one of the largest and most powerful scav gangs is upset about the earlier defeat of Makar, and demands that his former base be given back to the FOMA gang. Denis proceeds to have a lengthy string of skirmishes with this gang, ultimately ending in him killing their leader and further spreading the legend of the Predator, which is now becoming a feared name across all of Tarkov. While inside the lair of the FOMA gang, he frees a prisoner of theirs, Oleg. They realize that Oleg seems useless. He possesses almost zero combat or survival skills, and they're about to kill him on their way back to their respective bases, when Denis decides to talk to him first to learn more about him. Turns out he worked for Terragroup, and reveals that he's been inside one of the numerous Terragroup special facilities where they stored food, weapons, medicine, and various kinds of technology. He was locked in there by USEC on the onset of the Tarkov calamity, and these facilities are guarded by automated gun turrets. Denis decides to spare the man to learn more about him. While trying to leave the area, Denis and Oleg are ambushed by a squad of heavily geared Bear PMCs. The Bear fight ferociously. Denis manages to shoot one several times, but the rounds of his pistol and SMG have little effect on the heavy armor, so Denis decides to go for the legs. This also has little effect, as he learns later that the Bear PMCs apparently used morphine combat syringes before engaging in battle, and one Bear viciously rushed him, even with a severely injured leg. Denis and Oleg barely managed to defeat the PMCs, and Denis figures that the Bears were following Oleg somehow. Denis radios for friendly scav support, as he is severely injured. He is escorted back to safety and spends almost a week recovering in his hideout. After recovering enough to resume activity, Denis provides Oleg with a laptop, and they work together to decipher the collection of Terragroup keycards and flash drives that they have on hand. After some days, they find that they have a flash drive and a keycard that will allow them to enter the Terragroup facility that Oleg was originally stationed at. After nearly hesitating and not going there at all, as if they did something wrong and the auto turrets did not turn off, they would be killed upon entering. They get their things together and head off towards the secret Terragroup facility. After finding the facility, which is disguised as a municipal pumping facility and made entirely out of concrete, Denis carefully uses the series of keycards and flash drives to gain access to the bunker without being targeted by the auto turrets, which have obviously made victims out of a few people who ventured too close to it. Upon entering, they find a relatively small quarters complete with an armory, supplies, kitchen, and bunks. The facility has its own water, electricity, and air filtration supply. Upon gaining access to the lower level of the facility, they find that this bunker's purpose was primarily for resupplying USEC vehicles. There are a multitude of replacement parts from engine blocks to bumpers, tools, and workbenches. Denis figures that each Terragroup bunker serves its own function, but he isn't sure why they exist in the first place. While exploring, they find some kind of new contraption that Terragroup must have invented, a mobile sentry robot that has an integrated M249 machine gun and a whole suite of sensors. They move the sentry to the roof of the bunker, calibrate it, and now protects the bunker in addition to the auto turrets for a full 360-degree coverage. Seeing as this bunker is not only extremely secure, but also has some modern luxuries like showers, he moves his primary hideout to this bunker, while keeping his old hideout as backup. Denis performs some additional tasks to win over favors with various scav gang leaders and to establish a sort of equilibrium of power among the local scav gangs. Then, he meets once again with the drug dealer near the port, who is now normally called the Hood. After speaking with a few others who have read this book, this may not actually be Skier, but it's really Fence. Fence has a keen interest in the Terragroup property and flash drives, and after making an arrangement to exchange some hard drives, Denis agrees to facilitate the transfer of a large quantity of tactical gear and equipment that is near the port area. Also, the UN is finally mentioned for the first time. Denis remarks that they have walled themselves into the corner of the port area and shoot at almost everything and anything. Denis also remarks that pretty much every single scav group in Tarkov, as well as every trader, is familiar with Fence, and that they don't really like him, but they would also never dare to cross him. Fence arranges for a meeting between a criminal boss from the port area and Denis at Fence's headquarters. While waiting for the meeting to occur, Denis muses about Fence's existence, wondering how a drug dealer could have operated for such a long time right under Terragroup's nose. Denis admits that Terragroup, while not being in the business of drug dealing, did create a substance known as blue ice, which was sold officially as fertilizer. But there were rumors that it was something completely different, and that Terragroup was operating in a clear gray area and manufacturing the stuff on an industrial scale. Unfortunately, at least in this book, this is the first and last time he mentions blue ice. Through several tense conversations, Denis convinces the port boss to allow him to take 2 Terragroup cargo containers out of the port area, while the port boss can also have 2. These cargo containers were rigged with explosives and contained all kinds of useful military equipment and gadgets. And while successfully extracting the loot, one of Fence's representatives notifies Denis that cultist attacks are increasing in the area and that they are highly interested in finding or killing Denis, citing the fact that he has now killed 2 of their priests. Denis hurriedly loads up the Terragroup stolen goods in a convoy of vehicles destined for various traders and leaves the area. The book cuts to a big meeting at the same USEC base that Denis went to after the big firefight with the cultists. And once again, the USEC counterintelligence officer is meeting with the USEC commander there. But he has also brought along John Dirk, who apparently is a commander for the USEC Special Operations in Tarkov. They know exactly who Denis is, and question the local USEC commander and his past dealings with Denis. They learn that Denis was once part of something called Operation Tunnel, and become nervous that Denis might have been a Russian counterintelligence agent, exposing this Operation Tunnel to the Russians. It cuts back to Denis, who is laying on the rooftop of a building, sunbathing. He reflects on how many close encounters and battles he has survived, and wonders how many more are yet to come. And then the book ends. And now for my thoughts. First, I'll start off with the book itself and its writing style and translation. I think that this book is far more entertaining and well written than the first. Also, it appears that this book may have been translated by a different person than the first book, as it completely lacked the abundance of British humor that the first book had. That being said, there were times where it seemed that the translator may have been frustrated or exhausted and just threw a few sentences or paragraphs into Google Translate. There were several times where several words or entire sentences were jumbled together or had very odd punctuation, but overall it was easier to follow than the first book. I still feel that the author could have expressed more character development out of Denis. There are a handful of times where Denis reflects on his old life, but they are few and far between. And it would have added more complexity, emotion, and drama if Denis really struggled with the sheer amount of death he brought onto others. And while Denis can seem like a Mary Sue most of the time, overcoming nearly every obstacle, he does suffer wounds in this book and is tortured fairly brutally while in Makar's captivity, which made him seem a little less like a superhero and more human. As for the story itself, we learn a lot about the cult and Terragroup. Terragroup has all kinds of storage facilities that they set up well in advance, and the cult seems extremely talented in combat, but why? Also, USEC is not as unified and single-minded as I previously thought. There seems to be an upper and lower caste members within USEC, and the counterintelligence officer seems to know quite a lot about the cult, and seems almost giddy about how well they perform in combat. Very suspicious. It was great to see some interaction with some of the dealers we know and love, and while I would consider some characters in the book to be scab bosses, like Makar and the port crime boss, we haven't seen any mention of scab bosses that are actually in the game yet. Maybe that will be in the third book. And I really wish they would have elaborated on Blue Ice a little bit more. Next up is the third and final book, and hopefully we learn even more about the cult, USEC, Terragroup, and other characters from Tarkov. The book starts off with the Boar, a major gang leader in Tarkov, being asked to meet at a now defunct mall for a meeting with a mysterious entity. It appears that this is not the Ultra shopping mall, at least for now. It mentions that it contains a large theater and casino, but either way, it's a very large and ultra-modern shopping mall. It's possible that this could be the Ultra Mall and that the details are different because the design of the mall was not finalized when the book was written. When the boar arrives, a lone figure in a hood is sitting on top of a table in the middle of the casino and refuses to talk to the boar's sentries. He requests the boar to come inside. The boar does so and begins speaking with the cultist inside. At first, the boar becomes bored of the enigmatic talk of the cultist and threatens to leave when the cultist starts talking about being a witness to the arrival. But when the boar is about to leave, uninterested in further religious ramblings, the cultist stops himself, then finally reveals that his name is Peter and that he is a priest. He says that all cultists are equal and that they have no bosses or hierarchy, with one exception, the true rulers of the world. When the boar urges Peter to cut to the chase, Peter tells him that they want the predator, who we know as Denis. It also becomes apparent that the cult still doesn't know that the predator and Denis are the same man, but they do know that they are somehow related and that they want both of them. The boar immediately cites several events over the course of the last 2 books as reasons why one should not go hunting down the predator to the cultist. Makar, the Foma gang, and even the first priest that Denis killed that knew Misha. The cultists visibly cringed at the mention of the death of one of their priests, and kept pressing the boar to help, but he refused. Eventually, the boar suggested that the cultists go to USEC for help, but that's as much help as he's willing to offer, and he's perfectly happy to not be in the predator's crosshairs. The priest finally relents and draws a cross on the playing card table he was sitting on, and tells the boar that if he ever wants to meet again, that he should return and draw a cross on the table, and they will arrange another meeting. After leaving, the boar's men never observed anyone leave the building, but after returning, they found that the cultists are using underground tunnels to travel all over Tarkov, and that's how they gained access to the building in the first place. The book then cuts to Denis, who's back at his Terragroup bunker with Oleg. They are both trying to decipher all kinds of random technology they found in the shipping containers from the previous book, and making good progress. During this process, they also found that their bunker was hooked up into a network of some kind, and that life support system information was constantly being sent through that network to an unknown server or person. Denis muses that he wants to get to the bottom of why this all exists, but until then, he feels secure in the bunker. Then, the book switches to a small USEC squad that is set up in a building observing a street within Tarkov City. A squad of USEC is approaching from down the street, apparently moving slowly because they have quite a lot of loot, although what kind of loot isn't mentioned. The squad in the building is supposed to cover their advance through the area so that their friends can make it back to base safely. All is going well until one USEC with a scoped rifle feels a presence behind him and turns around to find not one, but 3 hooded cultists standing behind him with shotguns leveled at his face. He glances around and notices that the cultists are moving completely silently through the building and standing right outside of the various rooms and hallways that all of his comrades are in. Basically, they are completely screwed if they try to make a move. Without saying anything, the USEC slowly places his rifle on the ground, and one of the cultists removes his hood and explains that they mean no harm, and that in 3 days' time, they wish to meet with any USEC that has spoken with Denis. The captured USEC simply nods in the affirmative, too scared to speak, and the cultist tells him that all of their weapons will be stacked up behind the door of the entrance, as they have no need for them, and that one USEC standing watch had to be stunned in order to prevent him from shooting, but he'll recover. Then the cultists all silently leave, but slam the door on their way out. Mark Forbett, the USEC counterintelligence officer from the previous book, heads back to the same location with a significant entourage of guards for the meeting. After scanning the building with thermal imaging, they do see that at least one person is occupying the building, although Mark suspects that there may be more. Mr. Forbett then leaves all of the USEC guards outside and heads inside to find Peter the cultist priest sitting in a chair by a window. Peter requests that USEC deliver the predator, Denis, or both to them, to which Mark scoffs at this idea and that it's not so easy to do that. But just as the conversation is about to reach a dead end, Mark decides to help out as he wants to know more about the cult's operations, so he suggests that he will try to draw out Denis. But in return, he wants some kind of insight into the cult, as they don't clash with USEC often, but there have been some problems in the past. Peter replies that this is because USEC go places within Tarkov where they do not belong, and that these are places of power. Confused, Mark asks what places are these supposed places of power, and to provide Mark with a list so that USEC can avoid these places. Peter agrees and will supply Mark with a list of these places upon their next meeting. Again, Peter instructs Mark to leave a line marked on the wall of the entryway if he wishes to meet. If the line is crossed, the meeting is confirmed. Before leaving, Peter asks Mark several times what kind of man Denis is. Not knowing how to respond, Mark says that he doesn't know. Then even suggests that the predator might not even be a man. Peter seems intrigued by this, and then the conversation ends. The book cuts back to Denis, who is now showing concerns for a local scav group that has taken up residence in a large building near his bunker. If these scavs were to come poking around his bunker and discover just how fortified it is, now that Denis has 3 working auto turrets to defend the place, they may decide to sell or trade this information to powerful parties that may try to defeat his defenses, as a place that is so well guarded must obviously contain something very valuable. One distinction I'd like to make here is that the book makes it very apparent that scavs are a minority group within Tarkov, and that they are much less commonly found than the big bandit gangs. They operate in very small groups and are kind of like bumbling idiots with terrible weapons and gear that prey just about on anyone they come across. But the big gangs are the one that really run the streets of Tarkov, so maybe we'll see these gangs in the game in the future. Anyways, he infiltrates the scav stronghold fairly easily, and learns that there's a well under the building that the scavs are sourcing clean water from, and a warehouse nearby that had an immense supply of sugar. So naturally, the scavs began to produce moonshine and sell it to traders in the area, as well as their clean water. Denis knew that he had to get rid of this group of scavs, so while infiltrating their hideout at night, he repeated one of the tricks he played on Makar's gang previously, and spiked several dozen bottles of their moonshine with a powerful laxative. The following day, about a half dozen of these scavs returned to their base after making a trip to a local trader with bloody noses, and all of their weapons confiscated. When asked why by their leader, the shamed scavs told the bewildering tale of how when the moonshine they brought to sell was sampled, that everyone at the trader outpost began to violently shit themselves, and then another group of local scavs were hired to rough them up and take away all their guns. Also, the trader would no longer do business with this scav group. A few nights later, Denis makes his move by taking out a sentry of the scav group. When a group of them goes to investigate, several more scavs are taken out with terrifying speed and accuracy, which strikes fear into the entire group. Denis can see at night with the aid of night vision, while the rest of the scavs have no idea where the suppressed shots are coming from. After several have been taken out, they finally retreat to a nearby warehouse and stay there until morning, no one daring to come outside. When morning dawns, they find one of their own who is still alive, injured in the leg, but now bandaged up and actually in quite good condition. The scav tells the rest that the predator wounded him in the leg, then approached him and disarmed him, telling him that he meant no harm. After injecting him with something, the scav told his buddies that he began to feel better almost immediately, and then the predator gave him a medical kit and some kind of radio, with instructions that their leader contact the predator with this radio. At some point, Denis must have made the decision that wiping out the scav group might not be in his best interest, and that after striking fear into them, he could gain their respect. He made an offer to their leader, that he drop off a specified amount of water and moonshine to a specific address, and in return, they would receive gifts. Any remainder of what they produce can be sold to traders, as they've done in the past. Not wanting to fall victim to continued nighttime assaults, they agreed, and upon receiving their first gift from the predator, they found that working with the predator was very much in their best interest. The first gift package contained AKS-74Us, ammunition, military ration kits, and high-quality medical supplies. Happy that not only were they not the target of the predator, but now his ally, and now in possession of what passed as luxury items within Tarkov, they partied well into the night and enjoyed unrestricted rations of meat and moonshine. Denis takes some time to check in with his various allies in the area, or at least those who won't shoot him on sight. His first stop is to some traders, then to Gavrish's gang, who gives Denis warm welcomes. Gavrish informs Denis that Yusek and Bear have been fiercely fighting in the area, and then an armored truck carrying a very large safe was recovered from one of their battles. This seems to be a very special kind of safe that requires 2 different forms of keys to open, and if not opened correctly, it can self-destruct. Denis thinks to himself that this is something worth his attention, but at a later time. Then Denis visits with the Boar's gang, and the Boar finally informs Denis that the cult is on his trail and that he is a hunted man. Denis remarks that this is not a surprise, considering the past altercations he's had with the cult, and he heads off to an abandoned apartment to rest for a while. While he was making his rounds to these various gangs and traders, hidden cultists have been watching his movements and relaying them back to their base. The building Denis chose was a decoy hideout, a place he can retreat to if he feels he's being followed. Denis has rigged a room on the 4th floor with explosives, and has fashioned the room to appear that it's been recently occupied, with a bed, food, and other provisions. Hiding in a completely different room, Denis attaches a thermal optic to his Zig submachine gun. By the way, the 9mm Zig that the book mentions is probably actually a SIG, or a Sig Sauer submachine gun, and the book has mentioned previously that it's a Western gun, so it's most likely an MPX. He spots a figure in a nearby apartment window and takes him out quietly, since his gun is equipped with a suppressor. He notices a few figures now heading into his building. When he hears them on the 4th floor, he triggers his explosives. Looking out the windows, he confirms that there was in fact actually a very large group of cultists ready to assault the building, but after the detonations, they collect the weapons and the bodies of their dead and cease their assault. Denis thinks to himself that he could have very easily been overwhelmed by the cultists, and that he shouldn't underestimate them in the future. Back at his bunker, Denis and Oleg resume sifting through the various Terragroup networks and their collection of hard drives and flash drives. They've surmised that Terragroup has built modern infrastructure all over Tarkov, including CCTV cameras that watch all kinds of locations, the sanatorium on Shoreline, the lighthouse area, and basically any and every location all over Tarkov. In some key locations, automated gun turrets were set up to defend certain Terragroup areas and were completely autonomous. If anything came within range, it would be automatically fired upon. Denis remarks that this kind of thing is completely insane, especially since this was all set up during peacetime when there's no shooting or chaos in Tarkov. Oleg identifies where a main control hub may be located, and if they can get inside, they can look deeper into Terragroup's records and possibly learn more about the motivations and intentions of Terragroup and why this all started in the first place. Denis returns to Gavrish and asks him if he and some of his men can accompany him in searching for this Terragroup command bunker. They agree and set off on what they assume will be a week-long journey to find the bunker. The only way Denis can find this bunker is by matching up the local scenery with screenshots taken from the Terragroup CCTV database. Denis figures out that there's a code assigned to every single zone of Tarkov that Terragroup has assigned it, so they have a very rough idea of where to start. While the book doesn't explicitly say so, it appears that Denis's group find themselves at the Shoreline location, as Denis mentions that the tunnel to the lighthouse is nearby, as well as there being many cottages nearby. After surveying the carnage near the tunnel, they notice that heavily armed and well put together people are patrolling near the cottages. When Denis observes them through binoculars, he at first thinks they are Bear, but then realizes they all have a standardized uniform and armor that is not familiar to him, but seems Western. They seem to stick to patrolling one area, and Denis decides to leave them alone. My best guess is that these are raiders, but I'm not sure. After searching for days and not finding any sign of this bunker, Denis starts to lose hope. But after checking a ravine, he smells a rotting corpse nearby. Locating the body, Denis follows a blood trail to several more corpses, all unlooted scavs with some having some decent equipment, which is very suspicious to Denis as someone would have to be insane to leave all that gear behind. Putting two and two together, he realizes they may have been targeted by an automated turret. Denis searches the area and finally finds the location of the bunker. Scanning the area for some time, Denis locates a terminal to shut off the automated defenses, and after also releasing the door locks, Denis heads inside the Terragroup bunker. Inside, he notices that everything is coated in a thick layer of dust. One set of footprints on the dusty ground indicates that someone at some point had went inside the bunker and then left, but Denis is confident that this was some time ago. Nearby is an old keypad with a display, which is unlocked using the same flash drive Denis used to gain access to the facility. The place is dark, and on the keypad Denis activates a line that reads, "Control room lighting," but nothing lights up. Must be another room, he thinks. Another line says, "Duty officer station lighting," and he activates that, and overhead LEDs slowly begin to illuminate the area. Studying the panel, he notices that there's a room in this bunker which is an operating room. He thinks to himself that he must locate the control room, and then of course, the chapter abruptly ends. The book cuts to an unknown amount of time later, and Denis has dragged out numerous wooden weapon crates and displays them to Gavrish's gang. Inside they find unissued and in perfect condition old weaponry, everything from SKSs to PTRS anti-tank rifles. It is a seriously massive haul of weaponry, with several dozen weapons in all. They argue about how to take it all back, but eventually agree upon slowly hauling it back using nothing but their muscle. On their way back to safety, they were attacked by a well-organized group. It's unclear if these are scavs, cultists, raiders, or something else. But they are almost encircled by the attacking force when Denis retreats to a prearranged position and fires 2 short bursts into the air. Immediately, the scav group that Denis had befriended earlier that produces moonshine near Denis's main bunker open up from concealed locations on the attackers. It seems Denis anticipated this encounter. As soon as the attackers are all killed, all scavs leave the area and Denis and his buddies loot the bodies, finding some very high-end body armor on the attackers. Upon returning, Gavrish's gang is overjoyed about the massive amount of loot they've just gained. But while everyone else is celebrating, Gavrish begins to wonder about Denis. As soon as they all returned, Denis just vanished. He didn't seem to want any of the spoils. Also, why did Denis seemingly lead Gavrish's men into an ambush? Sure, none of Gavrish's men were killed, but it just seemed off to him. And since Denis didn't want any of the spoils, it must mean that he gained something of very significant value during the raid. But what? Gavrish tries to make sense of it, but ultimately is unsure of what to think of it. Either way, he suspects that there is much more to Denis than he previously thought. Denis pays the ragtag scavs handsomely for their rescue, then returns to his bunker with Oleg to go over the Terragroup records he stole from the bunker Denis visited. The bunker is old, at least 30 years old, and built during the time of the Soviet Union. But when Terragroup moved into the Tarkov region, they began to retrofit these old bunkers with new technology and use them for their own purposes. But what might that be? Denis doesn't know yet. Also, there are tunnel networks all over Tarkov. These tunnels, built during the days of the USSR, serve some purpose, but again, that purpose isn't known yet. But Denis is convinced that Terragroup used them for something, and it turns out that Denis did in fact visit the operating room in the Terragroup bunker, and it was completely filled with crates of weapons and ammunition. Meanwhile, Oleg is having difficulty accessing the main database of the Terragroup network. Denis leaves it up to him to figure that out, but in the meantime, Denis wants to explore these tunnels and see where they lead and what they're used for. Denis, now out and exploring around Tarkov on his own, notices a sniper ambush up ahead that seems to be again near the shoreline location. Carefully avoiding the sniper by crawling through the bushes, he gets himself into a predicament where he can't really advance forward and he can't go backwards either. Then, the sniper radios to his commander to send out a raid team to investigate the intruder. Hearing the team approach, Denis uses a clever combination of grenade booby traps to lure the heavily geared team into a kill zone of his design. Then, he uses 2 Chinese M46 impact grenades to take out most of the squad. While interrogating one of the 2 survivors of the group, Denis demands to know who they are, and the survivor finally reveals that they are raiders. Denis finds a way to escape, and when another raid party comes to assist the raiders, they are convinced that they were fired upon by mortars, and that they were instructed not to pursue the predator. Denis's instructions seem to have an opposite effect, as the loss of so many men only angered the raiders. And angered the raiders, Denis had. The raider base sent out what amounted to nearly an entire platoon of men after him. Running through the countryside, Denis did what he can to avoid them, but eventually they caught up to him. Denis hid as well as he could, but was then spotted by a small squad of 6 raiders, but only momentarily. When they went to investigate, Denis managed to flank around the squad and attack them from the rear, using his suppressed submachine gun. He managed to kill 4 and wound 2, buying enough time for him to reach the Terragroup bunker he had visited previously with Gavrish's gang and seal the door behind him. Later on, the book switches to the leader of this raid group, nicknamed Ivan the Terrible. The wounded raiders told their boss that the slippery prey they were chasing told them that this was their final warning and to not interfere with the predator. Unimpressed with this warning, Ivan the Terrible radioed all the other raider groups in Tarkov and placed a bounty on the head of the predator, living or dead. The book then cuts to Ivan the Terrible, leader of the raiders by the coastline. One of his men informs him that a visitor intends to speak with him and that they were unarmed, with the exception of one thing: they had strange-looking knives. Ivan agrees to the summit, and hooded figures with pale skin enter his accommodations. One of the figures throws back his hood and reveals to Ivan that he is Peter, a cultist leader. Cultists and raiders are on somewhat neutral ground. They've had small altercations in the past, but nothing serious. Peter informs Ivan that they've been listening to their radio communiques, as they do with every group that inhabits Tarkov, and that Peter knows that the raiders have recently encountered the predator and they want him as well, preferably alive. After some conversation about what had happened with the raiders, Peter asks to be brought to where the battle took place. After some investigation, Peter quickly identifies the hidden entrance to the underground, and tells Ivan that the cult's primary focus right now is to fully explore the labyrinthian underground that is all over Tarkov. It's a slow and difficult process for the cult, because they can't get into these access points very easily, and the tunnels are heavily mined and booby-trapped. Some traps even seem to be manually activated by a person or a group, most likely someone from Terragroup. When Ivan asks why they want to explore these dungeons, Peter does not elaborate and instead says that Ivan would never understand. But Peter makes Ivan a deal. The cult will provide the raiders with experienced tunnelers, and together they can make more progress in both exploring the underground as well as finding the predator than they could have separately. Ivan agrees. Back to Denis. He's now spent 3 days in the tunnels under Tarkov. Already aware of booby traps from surviving in Tarkov for so long, he picks through the tunnels very slowly and carefully, and never too far from the control room next to where he entered from. A few forks in the tunnel obviously lead very deep underground, and he doesn't want to go that way, at least not yet. In one area, he found a locked steel gate, and after checking for traps and finding none, he broke the lock and found dozens and dozens of wooden weapon crates. Inside were all kinds of things from canned meat to entire crates full of SKS rifles, 7.62x39 ammunition, and in the corner of the room, even an old Maxim water-cooled machine gun. All Soviet-era supplies. Then, he gets back in contact with Oleg by interfacing with the Terragroup network that links to all other bunkers, and Oleg explains that sensitive seismic sensors are picking up activity on the surface, and he urges Denis to leave immediately. Denis rigs up several booby traps, arms the automated defense systems, and then decides to wait and see if anything happens. The book cuts to the raiders and the cultists, with the cultists digging an area that they have identified as being an underground tunnel with the use of some kind of underground radar device that allows them to see cavities in the earth. 20 additional raiders have been sent to help Ivan, but in reality, the other raider bosses are curious as to what Ivan is up to and why he's collaborating with the cult. Finally, the cultists breach the tunnels with explosives and stop the raiders from jumping in the tunnels immediately, telling them that the tunnel needs time to fill with oxygen after such a blast. Then, the cultists volunteer themselves as the first to enter the tunnels. Upon entering the tunnel, a cultist informs Peter that a conduit that houses all kinds of wires has been severed in the explosion. Ivan asks why this is important, and Peter tells him that because all of the various technology that can be found in the tunnels is fed through those lines, so that someone can observe everything going on down there. And if communication or power is severed in one area, a repair crew will be out shortly to repair it. Whoever's in charge of these crews, according to Peter, care very little about what happens on the surface of Tarkov, and they only care about whatever is going on underground. It is also implied that the repair crew comes ready for a fight. Ivan orders his men to hunker down and take cover in the tunnel, but he notices 2 raiders, dispatched from other raider groups, produce their radios and relay what has just occurred and what might occur soon to the respective leaders. Ivan thinks to himself that it won't be long before this place is crawling with raiders, all looking to get in on the action. After encountering one of Denis's booby traps, the cultists decide that it's too risky to try to disarm the traps, and instead, they will tunnel around it. The raiders are now chomping at the bit for some action, and begin to think that the cultists are too cautious. After successfully navigating around a trap and proceeding down a long, straight tunnel, body parts from both cultists and raiders begin to be torn from their bodies as a Dishka 12.7mm heavy machine gun roars to life at the end of the corridor. Through the chaos and carnage, nobody gets a good look at who or what is behind it, but it's none other than Denis. Not a single cultist survives the onslaught, and only 6 raiders make it back to the surface. Now topside, the surviving raiders are in shock from what had occurred, but Peter manages to calm them down with an eerily soothing mantra, and they explain what had happened. As the raiders and however many cultists that were on the surface think of what to do next, it cuts back to Denis. Denis has traveled very deep into the tunnels now, by his estimates, at least a few kilometers, and he judges that the section of tunnel he is in now should be right along the coastline somewhere. The tunnel has gotten very narrow, in some places only a meter wide, which makes Denis wonder again what these tunnels were used for. They weren't for transporting anything, as there are no railways or signs of vehicles, and with some corridors being so tight, that would have been impossible anyways. He finally finds a small keypad that accepts the same flash drive he used to access the underground with. Inside is a small office, which he reckons is an observation post. Accessing a computer inside, he finds that to no surprise, this is all Terragroup equipment. He also manages to find a directive for USEC, issued by Terragroup. It reads as thus: Set up posts that block the coastal highway and prevent the passage of enemy forces from the direction of the lighthouse and the roadblocks of the Russian interior forces. Ensure unobstructed evacuation of all persons from the sanatorium onto the arrival boats. Upon execution of the order, disassemble the posts, clearing up traces of your presence if possible, and move back to the main base by land. Denis figures that these tunnels must have been designed for USEC to use so that they could navigate around Tarkov without being seen, as well as disappear if need be. The observation bunker in this section of tunnel is complete with a command room, kitchen, barracks, weapons and food storage rooms, and a head which also features a shower. He rewrites his flash key so that it will only open with his specific key from now on, and then rests. The book then cuts to Mark Forbett, the USEC counterintelligence officer. A junior computer analyst from either USEC or Terragroup urgently requests to speak with him. Turns out that Terragroup's computer system has logged every single use of flash keys, and a top-secret program that runs on the Terragroup system, named Torch, uses algorithms to detect suspicious activities. The key Denis has been using was flagged under the system, and once looked into, the analyst discovered that the key holder has been recorded as dead, and that the key Denis is currently in possession of has the highest level of clearance within the Terragroup organization. Basically, Denis can access anything he wants. When Denis used the computer in the underground observation post, the webcam on the computer took a photo of his face, a face that Mark Forbett recognizes. Mr. Forbett then calls the most experienced USEC team leader on the base and instructs him to go track down Denis and that he must be captured alive. Later on, Mr. Forbett has another conversation, but this time with a senior computer analyst from Terragroup. In this conversation, if I was reading the book right, a major bomb was dropped. Denis is actually a well-known and extremely talented freelance hacker. Somehow this information was missed by Terragroup while he was working there, and how this information comes to light now is a mystery. But he may be a mole inside the Terragroup Corporation. His motivations? Unknown. He was working with another hacker who goes by the alias Drill, and the first stirrings of their relationship was an incident within the Terragroup Corporation that now goes by the codename Nevermore, where there was a massive intrusion to the central Terragroup database located in Antwerp. This further surprises and worries Mr. Forbett, as this mole now has access to pretty much anything owned by Terragroup within Tarkov. The book cuts to the experienced and combat-hardened USEC team sent to exterminate Denis. On their way to execute their mission, they're ambushed by a ragtag group of scavs, whom despite their lack of gear or military training, have refined their style of ambush. The ambush is successful at first, killing several of the USEC and wounding several more, but the USEC guys respond with overwhelming firepower and underbarrel grenade launchers and eventually kill or force a retreat from the remaining scavs. Left with only 9 combat-ready operators, they proceed on their mission. Before the USEC operators head to the tunnel system, Mark Forbett asks his computer guy if establishing a connection with the bunker Denis is currently in is possible. He answers in the affirmative, and after some time, Denis answers and he and Mr. Forbett have a humorous exchange that eventually ends with Denis saying that he needs 5 minutes to think about it. After 10 or 15 minutes of no response, Mr. Forbett authorizes the assault on the bunker. After some time, video connection is re-established with the bunker, but this time, it is a bloodied operator from the USEC team. Apparently, Denis was not even inside the bunker when he made the call, and he had rigged all kinds of various traps for the USEC to discover. They lost several men in the process, including 2 that may be trapped in a collapsed area of the tunnel. Shocked and dismayed at this outcome, Forbett orders the USEC to immediately return to the base. Back at his bunker inside the city, Denis gets some much-needed rest. While he rested, Oleg sorted through the backpack of various goods and gadgets that Denis returned with from the Terragroup tunnels. Denis feels like they're getting closer to what this all might be used for, but they still need to discover more. Oleg and Denis share stories of what they've picked up on over the years. Before conflict came to Tarkov, container ships and trains full of guns, ammunition, medicine, and rations constantly flowed into Tarkov, all carefully ordered and inventoried by Terragroup. Obviously, Terragroup was preparing for some kind of very serious event, but what? The book then covers a lengthy series of events, where the scavs near Denis's base is instructed to pick up various drops around Tarkov and deliver them to traders. Each time they do this, not only do the traders give the scavs some items, but there's always something at the drop sites that are marked as being for the scavs. Over time, the ragtag scav group transforms into what is now a considerable scav gang. They number about 50 strong, absorbing loners they come across rather than ambushing and killing them. and everyone is now outfitted with modern weapons and some even have armor. But on one trip to collect a drop near the coastal area, a group does not return. It turns out that this group was captured by Ivan the Terrible's raiders, and Peter the cultist priest is still with them. Peter has brought in reinforcement cultists, which appear to be warriors, and have a very intimidating look to them. In the basement of the cottage that the raiders reside in, a former professional criminal serves as their torturer, going by the name The Conductor. He ruthlessly tortures and disfigures the captured scavs until they finally reveal who they've been working for, and it is the Predator. In a meeting between Peter and Ivan, Peter somewhat incorrectly is convinced that USEC is working with the Predator. Peter thinks it's impossible for the Predator to gain access to Terragroup caches, so the only explanation is that USEC is giving him equipment. He asks if the raiders will help the cult assault the scav compound, which is basically across the street from Denis's bunker, but Ivan flatly refuses. Peter takes the rejection in stride, thanks him for his hospitality, and leaves with the rest of the cultists the following morning. The book then cuts to a USEC patrol that is responding to a now abandoned USEC building that was fortified inside the city. Why USEC abandoned this building, we don't know, but they left sensors behind as well as all kinds of mines and booby traps in case anyone goes around tampering with their previous base. After making it inside, the USEC in charge is about to check a wall terminal to review its logs and see why a sensor was tripped, when a member of the USEC squad is suddenly dragged by his feet into another room and he instantly goes unconscious. The book then cuts to the USEC man coming to, in a small room that is filled with cultists. One draws back his hood, and it's Peter. Up until now in this book, Peter has been very soft-spoken, maybe even polite to most people he meets. It's very clear that Peter now means business. He tells the USEC man that he's been betrayed by USEC, and that he is to relay to Mark Forbett that he is to deliver the Predator or Denis to them immediately, or they will suffer consequences. When the captured USEC asks about his squad mates, Peter tells him not to worry about them, as they have experienced a fate worse than death. They will never see the coming. The book then cuts to Forbett debriefing the lone surviving USEC operator. After he's dismissed, Forbett accuses the USEC base commander of colluding with the Predator, and the two men have a tense conversation. Eventually, Forbett relents and apologizes, but makes it clear that they need to deliver the Predator to the cultists, and soon, as if they don't, they're about to have the worst enemies they can have in Tarkov. To do this, they need to start with one of the traitors, Kokol. I'd like to stop for a minute and explain that Kokol, if I'm pronouncing that right, has been mentioned numerous times in the past two books and originally went by Ogryzenko, or sometimes Ogryzgo, and is one of the original dealers. The name Kokol is Russian slang for Ukrainian, and according to the Tarkov wiki, he's a future dealer that will be added to the game, specializing mostly in foodstuffs. He's also the bald-headed traitor in the Raid live-action series, as evidenced from Skiff's line, "I guess I need to go visit Ogryzok." I wanted to clear that up as some characters go by 2, 3, or even 4 different names in this book, and it can get a little confusing. Denis receives word from this dealer to come see him, because a USEC came around asking for the Predator, and this dealer knows that Denis works for the Predator. Denis shows up, and turns out that the USEC is still there. Denis gives the USEC a radio, instructs him to give it to Mark Forbett, and they will communicate. Meanwhile, cultists are now attacking USEC patrols, and there are losses on both sides. Mark Forbett wonders how long it'll be until this issue can be concluded, and also expresses dismay at the current situation. They are barely ever contacted by USEC or Terragroup brass, and when they do speak, it's just the same instructions. Just keep holding on. But he's beginning to doubt that there's a next step of this plan. Denis then calls Mr. Forbett on the supplied radio, and Mr. Forbett makes an extremely weak proposal to Denis. Even though he had sent a kill squad after Denis very recently, Forbett suggests that they let bygones be bygones and start anew, and that he will compensate Denis for the inconvenience of past transgressions. Denis agrees to meet in person, but at Kokol's shop, and that if Mr. Forbett arrives with a massive USEC squad, that bad things could happen, as that is not USEC-controlled territory. Forbett agrees, and even promises to make the last leg of the journey by himself. Over the next chapter, the cultists have positioned themselves near one of Denis's caches that he regularly sends his next-door scav gang to go collect and drop off at various traders. They are hoping to catch Denis checking in on the stash, and then capture him. Peter tells one of his cultist brothers that both Denis's and the Predator's skills are so profound that his real goal is to convert Denis, the Predator, or both, to their cause. And if he can't, then he must be killed, as they are too dangerous to be free within Tarkov. Denis, who is just as careful and silent as the cultists themselves, when dropping through the area to check on his stash, notices the cultists in a nearby apartment first, and he decides it's time to deal with them. He enlists the help of one of the same snipers that helped him with Makar's gang, who now has a PTRS anti-tank rifle and offers him a thermal scope, paid in advance, to help him with a task. Barely able to resist a fancy thermal optic for his insanely powerful rifle, he agrees. The book then hints that Denis has made all kinds of other plans for this confrontation, but first, he must meet with Mark Forbett. The meeting with Mr. Forbett is brief. Denis enters and confidently smiles and greets the USEC counterintelligence officer, who mumbles a greeting in return. They waste no time, and as Mark said, he intends to make up for his past disturbances between the two, and he calls over the traitor to inform him that he will pay for a 100,000 euro line of credit for Denis. Satisfied with this, Denis agrees to bury the hatchet. Then, Forbett discusses the cultist matter with Denis, and Denis says that he has a solution, and the book cuts away to the cultist perspective. What happens next is basically the final battle of the book. A lot happens, and I would probably have to write several pages to describe it all, so let me just say this. It involves the cultists creating a diversion by killing their own people, which at one point, a fellow cultist briefly questioned the orders of Peter. Denis outsmarted the cultists in typical fashion and created a diversion of his own, and forced the cultists, including Peter, into the open, so that they could hopefully capture Denis. When this happened, a huge squad of Denis's next-door scav gang absolutely unloaded on the cultists, as well as the sniper with his anti-tank rifle. Also, Denis brought one of the Terragroup sentry robots with him and equipped it with some rocket launchers that shoot thermobaric missiles. It was pretty crazy. Some of the cultists died extremely gruesome and bloody deaths. And finally, Peter was forced back inside of a building to hopefully link up with the rest of the cultists. Although at that point, there weren't many left. Keep in mind that these are not all the cultists within Tarkov. There are other groups. Finally, they are trying to retreat out of the area through an attic, and the anti-tank rifle sniper can see tiny thermal signatures through bullet holes in the roof. Knowing that only a couple cultists remain, Denis decides to finally deal with this personally, and he rampages through the building while throwing copious amounts of grenades and shooting quite a lot. Finally, Peter opens his eyes and it's morning. The battle has been over for some time, and he awakens in incredible pain. Sitting on a wooden beam next to him is Denis, who addresses himself as the Predator. When he asks why Peter was looking for him, Peter only has the strength to say that he was his enemy and that he must be stopped. At this, Denis releases a terrifying and creepy laugh that manages to even scare the cultist priest. Denis then hooks Peter's cultist knife on his belt, beside the other two cultist knives, and basically tells the priest he will not be avenged, and anyone that tries will meet the same fate as he did. Knowing that Peter's spine was broken and he didn't have long to live, he simply left him there, and Peter ends up being one of the only people in Tarkov who saw the Predator and knew who he was. And then the book ends. And now for my thoughts. First, I'll start with writing style and translation. This book was by far the best written and translated in the series. Grammatical mistakes and poorly translated sentences were few and far between, and it made reading the book far more enjoyable than the other two. In fact, I finished the entire book in about 2 days. But as far as the writing itself, the book still suffers from an abundance of plot holes and character issues with our main character, Denis. Denis is definitely a Mary Sue, or the male equivalent of that. For those that don't know, in books and movies, when a character experiences very little hardships and is seemingly invincible, they are given this name. It cheapens the narrative and drama associated with the character, as since they can overcome nearly every obstacle without breaking a sweat, the reader comes to believe that no harm can ever come to that character, and it eliminates any kind of suspense. I'm going to make a separate video on my thoughts as the series as a whole, and what I think it may have added to the overall lore and story of Tarkov, so make sure you stay tuned for that video. I appreciate you all watching and supporting this channel. It's because of you that these videos are possible. I'm going to get to work on new videos, so until then, I'm Jeff with EUL Gaming. Good luck out there.